Good evening, my dear colleagues. Welcome to another INGED Zoom Serious Talk. Today, our guest is Associate Professor Dr. Luis Guerra. Luis Guerra holds an MA in TESOL from Hunter College, USA, and a PhD in Applied Linguistics / English Language Teaching from Warwick University, UK, and has taught English and Applied Linguistics in Brazil, US, UK, Spain, and Portugal. He is currently an associate professor at the Department of Linguistics and Literatures of the University of Évora, Portugal. He has been involved in several Erasmus Plus projects, and his research interests are English as a lingua franca, English as an international language, world Englishes, intercultural communicative competence, intercultural citizenship education, and accent discrimination. The title of his talk this evening is Building English Through English Language Skills Through a Global English's Perspective. It's not flu, it's just I cannot read. Let me repeat the title, Building English Language Skills Through a Global English's Perspective. Thank you, my dear colleague, for being with us, accepting to be our guest speaker. I do appreciate that a lot. And welcome again. The screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Assoc. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name that harshly. It is a pleasure to join INGED again, and be among such committed academics and teachers. I've had a long experience with dealing with Turkish professors and teachers of English in projects. So I have the best time whenever I'm engaged in events or conferences or projects with the Turkish academics and teachers. So I'm sure it's going to be a great experience for me, and I hope for everyone else as well. As Professor Assoc said, I'm going to deal with the perspective of incorporating global Englishes, the concept of global Englishes in our English language classrooms. To do so, To do so, I structured my presentation the following way. First, I will briefly introduce the approach, the global English's approach, what it means, what it aims to identify as its objectives, and then also refer to incorporating global Englishes in language teaching, which is the GELT perspective, and to do so in order to apply and think of practical examples of incorporating those world Englishes in our classes. I brought some background information on African American Vernacular English, Australian English, Indian English, and Singapore English. Let's see how we manage to do that if we don't have time to go through all these varieties of English. Of course, I'm more than happy to provide the information that may be missing in our in this presentation to whoever is interested in. So in terms of the concept of global Englishes, it is important to identify two main aims of this approach, of this perspective. The first one is the global Englishes approach aims to demonstrate the role of English as a worldwide language. That's the global perspective of the title of this approach. It emphasizes exactly the global ownership, not just the ownership of a few societies, a few countries, but emphasizing the multitude, the complexity of forms that English takes, as well as the diversity and intricacy of the cultures associated with English users, without emphasizing, we're going to see that soon, without emphasizing solely the native speaker cultures. And by doing so, it aims to distinguish itself from exactly what I said a while ago, the native English taught in traditional language classrooms. So I'm going to be using the adjective traditional later on, so as to compare these approaches, the global Englishes and the traditional classroom approach. And the other aim would be to encourage, on a more practical perspective, to encourage the integration of global Englishes into English language classrooms, in order to cater for the requirements, the needs of students, of our 21st century students who are expected to use English in a worldwide setting, not just to communicate with native speakers. So this is somehow summed up by Matsuda when she said that the conventional ELT methods might not adequately address the evolving demands of teachers, students, as well as societies, because there's a new perspective, a new way of approaching English language teaching and learning. So, summing up, a pedagogy informed by global Englishes emphasizes exactly that enhancement of students' communicative abilities as skilled, competent, proficient users, and evaluates students' English competence based on mutual intelligibility, their ability to communicate effectively, rather than striving to meet native speaker standards. So we don't measure our students' ability to use English just by adhering to native speaker forms, but by being able to communicate effectively globally, right? So this diagram somehow also identifies the perspective of global Englishes as an umbrella term that has recently incorporated what academics, what applied linguists had previously worked on, investigated, researched on, such as the idea of English, or the role of English as an international language, EIL, as well as the focus on the varieties of English, not just the native varieties, but all the complex and the multitude of varieties, which is behind the concept of world Englishes, as well as the perspective, the concept of English as a lingua franca, which somehow relates to EIL and world Englishes, but this time English as a lingua franca emphasizes the idea that English is used by non-native speakers. So English is most of the times nowadays is being used by non-native speakers communicating, not necessarily with the presence of a native speaker. Just because of numbers themselves will explain that possible absence of a native speaker. So you put them all together. This is what Selvi and Yazan and Rose and Galloway more recently proposed as the umbrella term of global English. So by adhering to global Englishes, you bring to the table the idea of English as an international language, world Englishes, and English as a lingua franca. I'm going to emphasize, my presentation will emphasize the world Englishes aspect of global Englishes, because I'm going to bring examples of varieties of English that can be brought into the language classroom. So if we think about all those concepts, but in a more practical and pedagogical way, the global English's language teaching would be identified through these five aims as well. We teach through a global English's perspective to increase world Englishes and English as a lingua franca exposure in language curriculum, as well as we emphasize and
four big guys and they grab on my thighs, blow up my guts like the 4th of July. If they keep fucking my butt, then I might just cry. Poop and finger spraying on my eye. He lick my dick and the cum start spraying. Charging on my dick, I'm gonna go super saiyan. When he come to fucking booty, I don't do much playing. I whispered in his ear like, hey, are you staying? Four big guys and they grab on my thighs, blow up my guts like the 4th of July. If they
Oops. Are we okay now? Yeah. Okay. So, as I was saying, a third objective for global Englishes is for the global English's language teaching perspective is to raise awareness of global Englishes in ELT, which somehow sums up or reinforces the first objective, as well as the fourth objective, which is to raise awareness of English as a lingua franca strategies in language curriculum. And finally, the emphasis as well on bringing a diversity of cultures and identities of language users in English language teaching. So, summing up again, what we can say about global English's language teaching is that a global English's informed pedagogy highlights developing students' communicative competence. And I would reinforce that idea and oppose it with native speaker competence, right? So it's communicative rather than native speaker competence that a global English's informed pedagogy highlights. And not in terms of native speaker, and assessing the proficiency of our students, focusing on mutual intelligibility rather than approximating to native speaker norms. That doesn't mean that we're not going to use native speaker norms in our classes, right? That continues to be the content, but it's not just going to be solely on native speaker norms, native speaker language, native speaker culture, as well as the GELT approach aims then to bridge.
Hello, can I ask a question? Can you shut the fuck up, bitch, please?
So the GELT approach aims to bridge the conceptual gap between theory and practice with an attempt to provide an alternative approach. So an alternative approach doesn't mean to substitute that. We're not going to be teaching the native speaker norms, the native speaker standard language, but it is added. The GELT approach is added to our language curriculum. So we re-examine our materials, our techniques, our activities, and consider ways of incorporating that global English's perspective in our teaching, because we believe that that's what our students are going to need as users of English in a global context. So very briefly, this table somehow distinguishes the aims or the perspectives, the traditional English-based approach and the global English's informed pedagogy. When it comes to the target interlocutor, I mean, who our students are going to talk to, use English with, the traditional English approach focuses on native speakers, as if our students are going to talk to Americans, to Canadians, Australians. That's why they need to learn the standard language and their cultures. So the global English's pedagogy emphasizes that they're going to be using English with whoever uses English globally, all English users. And that is also true for ownership of English. So the global Englishes gives ownership to all of us who use English, and as opposed to the ownership of native English speakers of the traditional approach. When it comes to nature, so our ELT traditional materials and activities focus on fixed English native cultures, English cultures, and the global English's perspective looks at culture as something fluid, as something that does not belong to a specific society, that cultures are built and negotiated and brought to the whatever exchanges that we have with all sorts of language users. The norms in the traditional approach are standard English, and the global English's informed pedagogy expands that besides standard English, we should look at English as a diversity of flexible and multiple forms. There's much more to standard English when it comes to exposure, right? So we have to distinguish here being exposed to receiving varieties, receiving these multiple forms, as opposed to producing, right? So I'm not going to go into much detail, but the production of language goes back to that aim of mutual intelligibility, even if that language that is produced does not conform totally with native speaker norms. When it comes to ideal teachers, the traditional approach usually accepts the non-native English teacher when that teacher shares the language of the students, and also emphasizes that the ideal teachers should also be native English speaking teachers. The global English's pedagogy accepts, of course, native English speakers, teachers, and as well as non-native English speakers, but regardless of their language. Their first language might not be the shared language with the students. The role model, as I said a while ago, would be the native English speakers in the traditional approach, and the global English is informed is the proficient users of English, the aim to be achieved. Materials, native English and native English speaking cultures in traditional ELT classes. So it's not related only to native cultures and contexts, but any culture, any context that uses English. And the role of the first language and the culture of the student is, well, it's debatable there, but traditionally it is avoided. So we should avoid using the first language. We should avoid using the culture, because the aim is the native culture. But the global English's informed pedagogy sees L1 and L1 culture as resources to be explored in the classroom. And finally, the assessment is, students are assessed based on how close, how approximate they are to native English speaker, and global English's informed pedagogy aims at mutual intelligibility and comprehensibility. That's how students are assessed. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring some examples of the language of some different varieties, some different world Englishes that may be incorporated in our classes. First of all, the African American Vernacular English, which I think that our students are somehow familiar with, because the culture, the songs, the presence of American culture, and specifically the African American culture in our daily lives. Now, African American vernacular culture used to be known as Black English vernacular among academics, but it may also be called African American English or Black English. Sometimes outside the academic community may be called Ebonics, which is ebony phonics, the accent of the African American community. Now, the African American community has unique varieties, but what seems to be unique to that variety maybe many times are shared. These features are shared with other standard and non-standard varieties of English. So sometimes it is interesting to look at those features and see that they are also present in other varieties of English, whether they are standard or non-standard varieties. And basically, well, in an attempt to identify the origin of those features, basically it comes from the contact between West African languages brought by the slaves in America with contacting some vernacular English varieties. That's what Sitnell proposes as an explanation for the features that exist in AAV. So AAV is a marker of identity. So this is when we cannot detach linguistic features from the cultural background of the community that uses those features. Because for many African Americans, the use of African American vernacular English reinforces their sense of a common identity. And many times for some non-African Americans, they make use of African American vernacular English features as an attempt to be part or to be somehow share some traits with African American community that we see usually, in our exposure to African American culture. So not only for African American vernacular English, but for the other varieties as well, I will be referring to some examples of phonetic and phonological features, grammatical features, and lexical features as well. I'm just going to show you the phonological phonetic features. I'm not going to go into detail because it's up to us to incorporate that specificity. As you will see, it refers to, phonemes, some sounds, some changes. So not every level of, a competence level of our students, we are able to deal with those specific phonological features of all these varieties I'm going to refer to. But these are features which might be interesting to refer to if we are dealing with accents, right? But the material that I'm going to bring, that I'm going to show you, does not deal with spoken features, only written features. So we're basically dealing with syntax, lexicon. And then, so the grammar of African American vernacular English, it's a rule. Those features do not exist out of nothing, out of the blue. I mean, they are rule governed. They have a reason. They can be explained syntactically. The thing is, they are deviant from standard English. And because of that, most of the times they are seen as wrong, bad English. So for instance, third person S deletion, I walk, he walk, genitive ending that disappears, Rosemary house instead of Rosemary's house. The nominative form of some pronouns are used rather than the genitive. So instead of their house, it's they house. When there is a copula between the pronoun and the verb to be, it's dropped, it's deleted. So he here instead of he's here, she a teacher instead of she a teacher. The use of ain't, I think that most of us are familiar with that. The use of ain't as a general negative indicator. So it replaces am not, isn't, aren't, haven't, and hasn't. And in some cases, some speakers also use ain't instead of don't, doesn't, or didn't. So it's possible to hear, I ain't know that, like I don't know that. Now, and another feature that I think that we are somehow familiar, that we tell our students not to do it, right? Which is to use multiple negation, which is a feature of AAV, like I don't know nothing about no one, no more. And a couple of features as well. altered syntax when it comes to asking questions. So instead of why aren't they growing, why they ain't growing, and instead of who the hell does she think she is, who the hell she thinks she is. So again, all of them rule governed. He's working right now. The present, right, is like he working. So there is a deletion of the verb to be. He working. He be working means the habit of working. So it has nothing to do with an activity being performed at the moment. So he be working means he works frequently or habitually. So it's better illustrated when you put the, the time, the habit, right? The repetition. He be working Tuesdays, for instance. And he stay working means that continuity. He is always working. And finally, the completive done. When they say he done worked, it means in standard English, he has worked. I mean, syntactically, it is okay to, let's say, interpret standard English, he worked, but the use of done is used here in the sentence to emphasize that the activity has been completed, totally completed, right? So these are some grammatical features of African American Vernacular English and the lexicon. We may see here, I selected some words. Many of them have already been incorporated in the jargon of, youth. Young people have, incorporated those words that originated from African American Vernacular English. For instance, bread meaning money, crib meaning house, mojo, magic power, influence, or charm, wigga or wigger, meaning a white youth who identify with African American culture, Mickey D's for the McDonald's food restaurants, to dig, to understand and appreciate, somebody who is gray, an adjective for whites, gray dude, the man in capital, the white authority, Miss Ann, white woman, bogus, which is common nowadays and in standard or at least in young people's speech, meaning fake or fraudulent, something that is hip, somebody well-informed, up to date, cool, very common, meaning calm, controlled, and bad, meaning the opposite, really good. So these were selected features of African American Vernacular English syntax and African American English lexicon that may be brought to our English classes. How? There is a multitude of activities that can be done to incorporate that. So one of them that I thought of that I did with I've done with my students sometimes. So that's the sounds of AAV. Sorry about that, I forgot. There is also the phonological aspects. So the accent, the marks of the accent of African American Vernacular English. I'm not going to go into details. It means changing sounds, replacing sounds, deleting sounds, changing stress, syllable stress, word stress, simplifying. So there are lots of features that are found in the accents of African American Vernacular English. Now, thinking about the activity itself, I think you are familiar with the book, The Color Purple. It's been turned into a very popular movie, and that text, one of the letters that the character writes, right, to God, is very peculiar in the sense that it brings we can identify easily those features of African American English. I'm just going to read the first paragraph so you can easily identify those features. He beat me today 'cause he say I winked at a boy in church. I may have got something in my eye, but I didn't wink. I don't even look at men's. That's the truth. I look at women though, because I'm not scared of them. Maybe because my mama cussed me, you think I kept mad at her, but I ain't. I felt sorry for mama, trying to believe his story killed her. Now, the remaining letter is also full of marks. So, one activity that you can do with your students that I usually do with my students is to, let's say, to translate that African American vernacular English features into standard English so that not only you are working towards the reception of the ability to understand what is written in AAV, but also you are also aware and able to, say that and use the language if necessary, following the standard English features. So that the first paragraph that I highlighted would be uh, uh, let's say translated like this: he beat me today because, instead of because, he said. So you have the standard English in italics bold, and you have the AAV in parentheses, because I'm just going to read the standard, right? Because he said, I winked at a boy in church. I may have gotten, because I'm following the American English standard, right? I may have gotten something in my eye, but I didn't wink. I don't even look at men. That's the truth. I look at women, though, so it also works towards, fixing spelling, right? Because the spelling of AAVE is phonetic, because I'm not scared of them. Maybe because my mom used to curse me. You would think I stayed mad at her, but I'm not. But I didn't. That depends on how you're going to interpret it. I felt sorry for my mom, trying to believe his story killed her. So it's the phonological pronunciation of kilt, but the spelling is AD. So that's one possible, let's say, activity that we can do with the features of African American Vernacular English and raising awareness of our students towards those features. Now, very briefly again, another variety that can be worked in our classes is Australian English. Somehow a variety that is present in our students' use of the language due to, us popular pop culture, those singers and actors, Hollywood actors and actresses who come from Australia. So Todd and Hancock, very briefly, to introduce what the Australian English variety is all about. Todd and Hancock that says that Australian English is less differentiated than the varieties of any other English-speaking society of comparable size because of the small population, the relative classlessness of Australian society, and the homogeneity of the original settlers. So it would be a variety of English that it's not that complex to be dealt with by our students because of this less differentiation from American or British standard English. Melchers and Shaw said that the importance of Australian English can also be felt, or is also felt, in EFL teaching, in teaching English, especially in East and Southeast Asia. There can be some similarities between Australian English and Cockney when it comes to pronunciation of Australian English, and there has been also an increased influence of American English in phonology, spelling, but mostly in the vocabulary of Australian English. And if we work towards the accents of Australian English, it's interesting to know that there are three different accents, three main accents of Australian English, and one of them has more affinities with received pronunciation that our students might be familiar with. And finally, MacArthur emphasizes what Melchers and Shaw pointed out, which is the American usage influence. So Australian English has, of course, had influence from British English, but increasingly from American English. But they also, MacArthur also says that there is less resistance to using British English features than American English characteristics features, but that has been changing, and we all know why, because of the overwhelming influence of the United States. Now, when it comes to features, morphology, grammar, and spelling of Australian English, for instance, and again, this is just a selection of the many features that can be touched upon in our classes. So by being influenced by both British English and American English, spelling in Australian English incorporates both differences. For instance, the use of the S or the Z. British spelling is usually generally preferred, although some words are usually written in the American form, such as program instead of program with double M and E, and jail instead of the G and the O. So it's an interesting, let's say, perspective awareness of language, because our students sometimes do not accept themselves as mixing varieties, using different spellings, for instance, American English and British English. So many teachers do not accept that. They want students to be coherent in using either British English spelling or American English spelling. But that is a very, difficult task, demanding task. And just by referring that Australian English is an example of the use of both. Of course, not just, chaotically, but there is a rule for them to use sometimes American English spelling or British English spelling. The spelling also, for instance, this example, the ISE and the IZE, as referred to before, are both accepted, but the ISE is the preferred form in Australian English. But it's, curiosity, a ratio about 3:1, but still, both are possible. Another feature of Australian English is the use of but at the end of a sentence as a modifier, which in standard English would be the use of though. I didn't do it, but. Another example would be the use of thanks in requests. Can I have a cup of tea? Thanks. And finally, the use of feminine pronoun she to refer to inanimate nouns and in impersonal constructions, such as she'll be all right. Not she, but everything will be all right. And she's a stinker today. This she means the weather is excessively hot today. When it comes to the lexicon, something that is peculiar, unique of Australian English is the use of diminutives, adding O or IE to the ends of abbreviated words. This is very, very Australian, like Arvo for afternoon, Doco for documentary, Servo for service station, which American English, British English, petrol station or gas station, Bottle O for bottle shop or liquor store, Traino for train station, Embo, ambulance officer, Jono for John, Barbie for barbecue, maybe you're familiar with that, Bicky for biscuit, Bikey for member of a motorcycle club, Brecky for breakfast, Bricky for bricklayer, Muzzy for mosquito, Polly for politician, Chippy for carpenter, and Sparky for electrician. This is very, you don't see that. It's basically Australian and New Zealand English. And also there's another diminutive using the suffix ZA, also used especially for personal names where the first of multiple syllables ends in R, like Karen becomes Kaza and Jeremy becomes Jazza. And finally, also diminutive in terms of names, Gabriel becomes Gabriel becomes Gabs, right? So you add the s, the final s, to a shorter form of the word. And again, from a huge list of lexicon, I chose take a load off, meaning to sit down in the holes during the holidays, fair dinkum, genuine, yapping, talking a lot, good on you, good for you, palmy, an English person, which is a little bit unflattering towards the British people, Kiwi, a New Zealander, footpath for pavement, and picture theater for cinema. Now, again, just out of curiosity, some features of the phonology of Australian English, but thinking about the feature, what can we do? There are lots of websites. I mean, the internet gives us a plethora of activities, and I took this from some websites, which is a vocabulary quiz. So you may have introduced those words, those features, or not. So you may start by giving this quiz to your students so that you know how much they know, or they are familiar with Australian English lexicon, vocabulary, and then talk about the meaning of those words. So let's see. I'm gonna give you 8. I'm going to give you 8 questions. Let's see how well you do it. Some of those have already been, I already identified before. Now, first one, if someone asks you what you were doing this Arvo, they want to know what you were doing. A, during the holidays, B, at lunchtime, C, this afternoon. So I'm not going to give you too much time, but if you remember, I talked about that. So it's Arvo afternoon. Okay. The second one, if someone invites you to a Barbie, they are inviting you to not to go to the movie to watch the film Barbie, but a bar to drink some beer, a barbecue, or a doll competition. So a bar to drink. I'm sorry, a barbecue. Okay, Barbie is a barbecue. If someone offers you a cuppa, they are offering you a cupboard, an Australia cake, or a cup of tea. A cuppa, a cup of tea. If someone offers you a tinny, they're offering you a tin for your food, a can of beer, or food. A can of beer. If someone tells you to take one for Ron, they mean give one to the man called Ron, take another one for later on, or please don't take anymore. So take one for Ron means to take another one for later on. Usually, in a pub, in a bar, to take another beer, another teeny for later on. If someone tells you they are fair dinkum, they mean they are telling you the truth, they were born in Australia, or they are overweight. So fair dinkum means they are telling you the truth. Fair dinkum, really, truth. And if someone is yapping, they are talking a lot, crying like a dog, or making something out of wood. You should have chosen talking a lot, yapping. And what's a bitter? A small town, a mongrel dog, or a sandwich. It's a mongrel dog. So still, you can give this test, this quiz, and give your students time to do some research on these the meanings of these words, and eventually incorporate that into a debate, a conversation, or any kind of activity in where they are going to produce a text. We don't have time for everybody. I was aware that we weren't going to be able to go through all 4 varieties, but I wanted to include that. And I just wanted to give you some ideas. For instance, once they know, that's what I said, once they know the meaning of those words, you can ask them to build a dialogue between two Australians. And in this dialogue, they are supposed to incorporate that vocabulary. For instance, good day, cover. What are you doing this Arvo? Not sure, I might meet you for a cuppa and some bikis. So we built this dialogue, and again, this dialogue can be turned into a dialogue in standard English. Instead of good day, cover, hello, my friend, hello, mate, what are you doing this afternoon? So still, you can still work with both, let's say, varieties that our students are more familiar with and the one that they're being exposed to. Again, Indian English, I would give you some features of Indian English, right? In terms of morphology, grammar, and more, there are many. And lexicon, again, same thing, lexicon, phonology, if necessary, and the possibility to build a text based on those features, grammatical and lexical features. So this text was written in Indian English, and you can compare what the Indian English, the features of Indian English with standard English. Like Sanjay is awake since 5 o'clock. Standard English, Sanjay has been awake since 5 o'clock. So you have those comparisons. So you have here the whole text, and I would do the same with Singlish, Singapore English, go over the morphological and syntactic features of Singlish. Again, lexicon, very peculiar of each of those varieties, phonology as well. And then you can build short dialogues. Either you build and you give them to your students, or your students can build the dialogues as well. So these short dialogues, sentences, they all use features of Singapore English, colloquial Singapore English. And again, the task would be how would a standard English dialogue be? So instead of Tom, you need to relax la. So you need to relax. Instead of very stoned la, it means I'm very tired. So you could do that with all the 6 short dialogues. So in a way, I was hoping to give you some ideas on exactly what we talked about in the very beginning of this presentation, how to incorporate, how to bring those varieties into our classes. Not going to say that the classes will be based on that, solely on that, but these features, these varieties should not be left out. So we should find time and ways to touch upon those features and have our students become familiarized, not meaning they learn these varieties, but they are familiar with differences, so that they also accept their differences towards that role model of the native speaker culture as the sole target that we should pursue in our language classes. So the idea is to widen the scope of the forms of English, the varieties of English, the complexities of Englishes in our language classroom. So that's it.
Thank you very much. What an interesting topic. When we had only British and American English, we had a very difficult time. Now we have several other Englishes. We are being bombarded.
Exactly.
Now, I have a question before I ask our participants if they do. Now, if, for example, an Indian is talking to another Indian in English, they will definitely understand each other. When, for example, a Turk talks to me in English, I do understand that Turk because I know Turkish English. However, a native speaker fails to understand Turkish English. So my question is, if, for example, a native speaker, of course, when I say a native speaker, who am I referring to? Let's stick to British and American English.
Sure.
Okay, Australian English, New Zealand. Oh my God. Okay, let's stop at British and American.
Yeah.
Because they have the market anyways. So the books are all published by them, whatever.
Yeah.
Is it really a good idea to introduce some of these words that are not understood by native speakers? Of course, we can scatter them. I do understand your point. But what are our students going to do with them? If it is only specifically used within that English, that English dialect, how are our students going to use them?
Yeah. That's very that's one of the major topics of debate in the among academics who are to pursue this novel approach to English language teaching. So first of all, as I said, we should not confuse developing our students' productive skills with the receptive skills. So what I meant by identifying those features and bringing them into the classroom is not for them to memorize those lists, right? And have those words or those sentences, non-standard sentences in exams, right? So we're not teaching them those varieties unless they are in East Timor and their teacher is Australian, right? So the same happens when we have American English teachers, American teachers or British teachers who teach us their variety. As much as we non-native speakers, we teach our students our English. We don't teach someone else's English. We teach the English we know, right? So the idea behind bringing those features into the classroom, on one hand, is more of a awareness and widening the scope, having our students, and when I say students, should be slash teachers, understand that learning English and using English is not limited to knowing or dealing with standard British and American English. Of course, we don't know if our students are going to deal with a Singaporean or an Indian or a Mexican, whatever, right? But that's the idea behind the global Englishes. It may happen. We don't know when, but it may happen. And it's more likely that our students will communicate with other non-native speakers than those native speakers. Of course, I mean, there are many different situations. If they go and study, take a master's degree or doctorate in an American university or a British university, I mean, everything is possible, right? But what you're trying to say is that it would be too limiting to not allow our students to know that there are other Englishes, that there are other cultures, and those classes are more eye-opening classes, and develop a sense of respect and acceptance towards the difference, towards the non-native accent, because and that's what happens with those native teachers who hardly deal with the different varieties, so that when they come to Portugal, when they go to Turkey, they don't understand the Turkish, they don't understand the Portuguese, because they are not familiar with those sounds, and expect everyone to speak like them, like native speakers, right? So yeah, it's not a prescriptive lesson, but it's a different way of understanding, of viewing the English that is used in the 21st century, which is global English, not American English or British English only, right?
Thank you very much. That was a very satisfactory answer. If you're done with your sharing screen, can you just stop it so that we can see each other? Yeah, that's great. Aysel Hocam has a question. Aysel Hocam, do you want me to read the question, or would you like to ask the question yourself?
Okay, Aydın Hocam, I can ask.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I'd like to appreciate Professor Guerra for this wonderful presentation. We have been enlightened, and I'd like to ask, is there a threshold level in order to incorporate this approach in our classes? Can we use this approach in the beginning levels, such as A1 or A2, or because, you know, in the exercise section you shared with us, you suggested us to use similar exercises and ask our students to compare these vernacular English examples with the standard ones. It means that they have to know the standard English first. Is it easy to incorporate this approach for the beginning levels? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's something that have already been discussed in you know, some. It worries lots of teachers in terms of, when can I use this approach? If you remember, some of the features, I mean, as I said, there are many features that you are going to select from that huge list of syntactic features or morphological features, or the lexicon, vocabulary, right? But if you remember, the African American Vernacular English, one of the features is the absence of third person, right? I walk, he walk. The deletion of the genitive S, Rosemary House. If you remember the Australian English feature as well, the use of both ISE and IZE. So I would say that you can easily find, maybe not many, but some features that meet the competence level of your A1, A2 students, right? Now, if you ask me, should I start as early as, you know, beginner students? It's your choice. It's your choice. It's always going to be your choice when and how to do it. Lots of teachers say, no, I'm going to wait for my students, or I'm going to start giving this perspective, this idea, this global use of English when they are more intermediate, B1, B2, because it's possible then to go a little bit deeper in the changes. But as I said, you can start as early as the simple present, as spelling of words, when you show that there's life beyond American English, British English, right? And then you start at early ages, A1, A2, like, okay, right? So I might deal with these differences in the future, right?
Okay, Aysel Hocam, did you get an answer for your question? Are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, but
okay.
I'm a little bit confused, because if the early beginner level students see those examples, they might be confused as well, because it's not very easy for them to understand the rules when we provide them with many different world Englishes and their examples. They may be confused a bit.
Okay. No. All right, you're right. Maybe I was not clear. I would not expose them to the differences at the time that they are being exposed to the standard language, right? So that would be confusing. So it's like, so what should I do? Should I say she walks or she walk? No. Please, if I led you to believe that, please forget. I'm sorry. Of course, there has to be some learning involved, some knowledge of the rule, right? Going back to, we teach the kind of English that we believe our students will be able to communicate, and it's better to expect mutual intelligibility and comprehensibility when our students use English with anyone else, if they use the rules of standard English, right? So we want them to say, she walks home every day. But what I'm saying is that once the rule is ingrained, is settled, there may be a time that they are already able to see that, oh, African Americans do not use that. They use she walk, and eventually even that A1, A2 student, if they somehow eventually talk to an African American member of that community who says she walk home, our student's not going to be, he's wrong, he's not using standard English, she walks. He already knows that that's how they're going to communicate. And possibly our student is going to say, oh, no, yeah, she walks home every day. My friend walks home every day. And that African American member is going to say, she walk home every day. So there's going to be an effective communication among them. But going back, we're not teaching them. If you think that it's going to be confusing, of course, don't even touch upon that, right? So you should know when is the best time to eventually introduce them to those features. As I said, some teachers wait until they've somehow mastered the basic syntactic rules of English, right?
Well, sometimes students come up with these examples.
Exactly.
If, for example, they have recently watched a movie where they have been exposed to this kind of, Black English, they come to the class and say, oh, Jam, I watched this movie last night, and they were like saying, he go, I go, she go.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the best answer to say, well, that is a kind of English.
Mhm.
It is their English. If you want to belong to that group, when you are with them, you can use that English. But if
Exactly.
you, most probably they are not going to accept you because you don't belong to that group,
That's the cultural
right?
part of,
So
yeah.
sociolinguistically, that's why, for example, we love English speakers who are trying to speak in Turkish. Their accent is so cute. They don't sound Turkish, but they try, and we love it. But we don't want them to belong to our group. They are not Turks. Okay, I may sound a little bit too nationalistic, but this is a sociolinguistic fact,
Mhm.
right? So Black
Correct.
community is not going to accept you anyways, so why try? But if you hear that, if you can hear that difference, that means you have reached to a certain competence level.
Mhm.
Okay, so when my students come to me and say, they usually come up with all these dirty words. after watching movies, because we don't teach them in the classroom, So they go like, oh, I heard something in the movie, and I go, if it's a taboo word, don't say it, okay? Don't say it. It's very dangerous. Please first look it up in a dictionary. Don't ask me.
Yeah.
I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
But this shows that they are interested. If they are interested, why say no?
Mhm.
Yeah, help them, show them the way. As my dear colleague has mentioned here, Louise has mentioned here, it's a different kind of English that is also acceptable, but it is not standard. But again, what is standard, right? We
Exactly.
used to say Istanbul Turkish is or was a standard, was the standard. Now in Istanbul, we don't have anyone who speaks in Turkish. Right?
Yeah.
So what happened to Istanbul Turkish? The same goes for example, I don't know whether you have been to London, my dear colleagues. If you are lucky to find a Londoner, a British person in London, you can easily communicate, believe me, but you can't find one. It's that London is under invasion, right?
You're right. You're right. Yeah.
It is very hard,
It is.
Louis, believe me, to
Yeah, it is.
understand an Indian, a person from India speaking in English. I was just about to kill myself, burn my diplomas, and, kill myself in the middle of the street.
Everybody goes through that. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you cannot feel, I mean, we should not feel disempowered, and we should not disempower that speaker.
Yeah,
So
yes.
dealing with global Englishes in our classes changes our frame of mind, so we know that there will be differences. And I just highlighted some international varieties of English. I'm not even considering here the geographical varieties inside the United Kingdom, inside America, right?
Oh my
Because
God,
you
yeah.
go to London, you go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, you're going to listen to, a multiplicity of English. So rather than focusing or thinking about this, my presentation as a recipe for what to do in the classroom, it's more like changing perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So until recently, I believe we were limited to believing that we learn English, standard English, American or British. Both of them together is like, whoa, some teachers would frown upon. And because that's what the English we need to use to a certain extent, because when we deal with English outside our context, that's what we're going to find. Exactly. This complexity of English is that many times will not be easy. But it takes familiarity. It takes a positive approach to differences.
Yes, I totally agree. Are there any other questions or comments before I start singing in French with my nasal voice? I don't see anything else. Of course, people are thanking you for this very beneficial presentation in the chat box. And I do thank you again and again. It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you so much.
By the way, I'm terribly sorry for those maniacs. I don't know how we ended up with those maniacs. I guess,
It happened.
yeah, it's Sibel Hocam says it's called Zoom bombing. So we have been targeted. I can easily take this to a very political end, but I'm not going to do that. Nowadays we are so political in this country. Believe me, everything becomes politics here. My dear colleagues, thank you very much for coming and joining this session. And my dear colleague, Luis, thank you from the bottom of my heart for this wonderful presentation. And I hope to have you again sometime, maybe in the future, with another wonderful topic.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.